Hello, I'm Simon Cleary, Economics Director at BiGGAR Economics, and this is an overview of the study that we did last year for Marine Scotland to define local areas for offshore developments. Marine Scotland commissioned this work because there is no standard way to define what onshore communities are local to an offshore development, and there can be significant variation in how these local areas were defined for socio-economic assessments of offshore developments. There was no way for offshore wind farm projects to be comparable to aquaculture developments and so on. And the size of local areas mattered. The environmental impact assessments measure the magnitude of effects dependent on the size of the baseline, be it the economy or the tourism offering and so on. And so if an area is too big, all impacts would be reported as negligible. For example, a £1 million impact in the village of Betty Hill would be significant. However, a £1 million impact across the whole Highland Local Authority would not be significant. Therefore, there was a drive to find a standard way of defining these areas. So we were commissioned and worked with Marine Scotland and industry to develop clear principles to defining these local areas. We consulted with offshore developers, we consulted with community representatives and with public bodies to get their input into both the process of undertaking such studies and the perceptions of what local actually meant. And what we have found that the perception of locality were not just associated with the offshore development itself, but with all epicenters of impact associated with the project. So a community next to the main port of operations for an offshore wind farm would still consider themselves to be local, even if they could not see the offshore wind farm. Therefore, we took the approach of initially identifying what epicenters of impact are for each type of offshore development, and decided that the local areas should be defined based on these. So, in the example given on the slide for an offshore wind farm in the Moray Firth, the epicenters of impact could be the site itself, the main operations or construction port, any temporary worker accommodation, or the visibility of that site. The consultation also identified that the supply chain and investment impacts, such as the jobs and GVA supported, and the wider socio-economic impacts, such as effects on tourism providers and so on, were quite different and should be treated at a different geographic level. And therefore we have split the supply chain and investment impacts and the local areas associated with those from the wider socio-economic impact local areas. As a result, a series of principles were developed. These are expressed as a series of questions that provide a practical process to creating relevant and applicable local study areas. For example, local areas are defined using geographies in which there is data available and in which the people who live in these local areas can understand them. So this slide outlines the principles for creating a local areas for the supply chain and investment impacts. And this slide outlines the principles for identifying a local area for wider socio-economic impacts associated with offshore developments. The approach to defining wider socio-economic impact areas is very similar. However, there is no requirement for the study areas to be joined up. The full report, the guidance document and worked examples will be published soon by Marine Scotland. The publication schedule has been delayed due to the COVID-19 outbreak, but Marine Scotland aim to publish the documents by the end of the year. Thank you for listening. If you want to find out more or see what these principles means for your own development, please get in touch.